The financial crisis and recession wreaked havoc with the retirement plans of millions of Americans who are now seeking new strategies to try and put their retirements back on track. Joining us right now is Gary Bhojwani. He is president and CEO of Allianz Life Insurance. And Gary, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
You guys have done some research that takes a look at just how thrown off Americans have been by what happened the last couple of years, and it's some pretty scary stuff. Why don't we talk about some of those research findings? About 54% of Americans in their late 40s feel totally unprepared for their retirement financially right now?
Absolutely. We've seen the crisis of 2008, which some would argue was still in the midst of, but we've seen that crisis really shake people's faith in a lot of the fundamentals that they thought they could count on. And when you factor in with that the demographic changes, where we've got more and more people coming into retirement, it's a pretty seismic shift. One of the staggering things that we found in that survey, we conducted a survey, actually had an independent third party do it. They polled 3,300 baby boomers. And one of the things that really surprised me in particular, we asked consumers if they would prefer a guaranteed product that gave them a 4% rate of return with no risk to principal versus something that might put their principal at risk, to market risk, say, and give them as much as 8% return. And they clearly chose the 4%. Now, that's the first time that we've seen something like that in a survey of this sort. So I think there's been a dramatic shift in terms of what people are looking for and just how afraid they are.
So that idea, you say you've been doing this for how long? You've never seen anything like that that's popped up in the last several decades? Yeah,
this is the first time we've conducted a survey like this, but we've seen other surveys. But in terms of what we've done at Allianz Life and the data we've collected, it's really been pretty stark in terms of the shift that we've seen. And again, when you lay the demographics into it, it really says there's a different way of thinking coming.
I guess that's not surprising when you start looking at some of the rates we see on Treasury bonds right now, where people are willing to say, take my money for the next 10 years, maybe I'll get back 2.7%, 2.8%. Just hold on to my money, give it back to me, and give me a very small rate. Right now, the 30-year at 3.9%. I mean, that seems kind of crazy.
I think that's certainly a factor. I think the other factor that people don't talk that much about, if you look, say, since 1945, around the time Social Security was put in place, lifespans of Americans have gone up by about 20%. And setting aside the rate issue, and the rate issue is clearly important in terms of the type of return, the real exposure is longevity exposure. People are living longer. You know, the old soundbite is life insurance used to protect against the risk of dying too soon. Now these products protect against the risk of, quote-unquote, living too long.
Yeah, this is another finding from that survey. Americans fear outliving their savings more than death by 61 to 39%.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the demographics, the rate of return, and I think there's also an understanding, if you look further into the survey, if you ask the younger boomers, people in their 40s, what they think their likelihood is of collecting their full due of Social Security, the vast majority indicate that they don't think they'll get their full due out of it.
So I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, you bring all these factors together.
Surveys say that most of us believe more in UFOs than we believe we're going to get Social Security checks so, in the X generation. So it's spot on.
I think when you bring all those factors together, it says there's a clear trend.
So what does that mean? You've had a lot more interest in annuities as a result?
Absolutely. What our company does, very simply, we help people prepare for retirement, and in particular, what our annuities do is they make sure people don't run out of money in retirement. It's the only product out there that can guarantee income for life, and we do that by pooling risk. That's what makes us really different than asset managers, than target date funds or systemic withdrawal plans. We pool risk across multiple consumers to make sure that you won't run out of money.
What happens if over the next few years people get their risk appetite back? I mean, that's a likely scenario, right? You would expect people to feel very burned by what we've seen the last couple of years. Do you expect to see them kind of grow out of some of those fears? You know, if the market took off again, let's say.
Sure. I'm willing to bet that history is littered with CEOs who said this time is different, and I want to guard against being one of those guys. But I think the reason this time might actually be different is simply because of the demographics, because you have the boomers coming through and going into retirement. They don't have a choice but to think about it differently this time than past generations, because there are so many of them and they're going into retirement. So do I think risk appetites will come back? Yes. Do I think that necessarily means people will go away from our products? No, because setting aside the rate of return issues, setting aside all the issues that are market-driven, they don't speak to longevity, and that is the biggest risk because we're seeing longevity go up.
All right. Gary, I want to thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.